It's Ellen, and today we're going to be talking a bit about demand. So the demand curve illustrates the relationship between quantity and price. Price is what the buyer pays for a specific good or service, whereas quantity is the total number of units purchased at that price. So if we had a demand curve, its shape is downward sloping, and on the x-axis you'd have quantity, and on the y-axis you'd have price, which effectively means that the higher the price is, the lower the demand is. So the law of demand states that there is an inverse relationship between price and quantity, assuming all other variables are constant, which is our concept of ceteris paribus, which we covered earlier. Demand is affected by your willingness and your ability to pay for a good. Willingness is affected by tastes and preferences, whereas your ability to pay for a good is based on your income. So it's effectively if you can physically afford to buy a good or service. Substitute goods are when there's an increase in the price of one good, there will be an increase in the quantity demanded of the other. And this is effectively when two products are very similar in their function. So for example, if you have Persil and Ariel washing pods for your laundry, if the price of Persil will go up, that means that the demand for Ariel will increase because it will be cheaper and more people will want it. However, you also have complement goods. And this effectively means that when there's an increase in the price of one good, there will be a decrease in the quantity demanded of the other. So, for example, if flights to Spain were to increase, the demand for sun cream would decrease. And that's because they kind of go hand in hand, which is what complement means. It's a complement with an E, by the way, not with an I, which is about complimenting someone on how they look or how they are. Crucial, don't do that. So there are two theories that explain the relationship between price and quantity. The first of which is the income effect, which states that when prices fall, consumers can afford a greater quantity of goods and services, assuming income is fixed. So demand for these goods and services will increase. The substitution effect, on the other hand, states that when the price of one good falls, consumers will buy more of the cheaper good or service and less of the more costly good or service. So demand for the cheaper good will increase as demand for the costlier good decreases. So to furnish that with an example, if the price of Pepsi were to go up, the demand for Coke would increase because they're substitute products. So in terms of the differences between complement goods and substitute goods, complement goods means that an increase in the price of one good will cause a decrease in the quantity demanded of the other. Whereas a substitute good, an increase in the price of one good will increase the quantity demanded of the other. And demand is affected by two factors, which is your willingness to pay and your ability to pay. Willingness is based on your tastes and preferences, and ability is affected by your income. So what causes shifts in the demand curve? The demand curve will shift to the right when there is an increase in demand for the good at each price level. For example, if a product is suddenly to become more popular, the demand curve would shift to the right. On the other hand, the demand curve will shift to the left when there is a decrease in demand for the good at each price level. So how does a change in income affect the demand curve? The effect of a change in income depends on your type of good. For example, if there's a normal good, increased levels of income will lead to an increase in quantity demanded. For example, if you get more money in your income, you're more likely to buy a new car. However, there are also inferior goods, which means that increased levels of income would lead to a reduction in quantity demanded. For example, you may consume less of a product such as rice if your income raised because you could think that you could buy something like quinoa. So we've just covered what a shift in the demand curve means, which is when it moves to the left or to the right, but you can also have movements along the curve, which are not to be confused. And a movement happens when there's a response to a price change. For example, a rise in price will lead to a demand contraction, whereas a fall in price will lead to a demand extension. So what happens to the demand curve for a normal good if income increases? Would demand shift to the right or to the left? It would shift to the right, and we've explained that this is because as incomes rise, the quantity demanded for normal goods will also increase. And to just firmly reiterate what the difference between a normal and an inferior good is, a normal good is an example such as a new car, and this will increase when your income increases, and an inferior good might be something such as rice. As incomes increase, consumers may swap it out for more expensive alternatives. So next we're going to broach the concept of diminishing marginal returns. Diminishing marginal returns is the concept that the more of something you add, the lower the impact of each additional unit is, assuming everything else is fixed. So let's finish this with an example. Imagine you've just bought a Domino's pizza and you've been hungry all day, and the first slice of the pizza is incredible and it's very satisfying. However, if you were to eat 100 slices of Domino pizzas, which would be pretty impressive, it might not be quite as enjoyable as that first slice. So your tastes can be satiated, which means you can have enough of something, and eventually the marginal utility of having another slice of pizza might be negative. So this is the law of diminishing marginal utility. Marginal utility is the extra benefit to an individual consuming a good or service. And the law of diminishing marginal utility states that the more an individual consumes, ceteris paribus, the utility of the good or service will decrease with every additional unit consumed. So that's quite a confusing concept, but imagine the curve being, it goes up and then it kind of plateaus off as the diminishing marginal utility takes hold. So the law of diminishing marginal returns can explain why the demand curve slopes downwards. As the quantity purchased rises, the prices that consumers are willing to pay falls. Consumers may be willing to pay a lower price for a higher volume because they gain less utility or satisfaction from each extra unit. So in terms of the definition of diminishing marginal returns, the more of something you add, the lower the impact of each additional unit will be. And if we go back to what we were talking about with substitute goods, if the prices of flights to Ibiza were to drop dramatically, the demand for flights to Greece would fall. The demand curve might shift to the left because of a decrease in the demand for the good at each price level. Let's broach some examples of diminishing marginal returns then. So, in the short run, factors such as land and capital can be fixed or hard to expand. Therefore, increasing labour, which is the number of workers, could be the quickest route to expanding. But the marginal product of each worker may decrease over time. So, for example, think about you're employing an additional 10 waiters in a small restaurant. The first few might be incredibly useful and improve the experience of your customers. But by the time you get into the 9th and 10th employee, they might just be getting in everyone's way, and that actually won't benefit the company at all. A consumer may enjoy goods and services such as chocolate or pizza or perhaps your job, and the marginal utility of consuming another slice or working for another hour may initially be positive. But too much of this may eventually cause discomfort, and so marginal utility turns negative. So finally, let's reiterate how the level of consumption can be determined by different factors. These factors could be the marginal utility of a good, utility of other goods, the budget the consumer has to spend, so that's the ability to pay, and the preferences of the consumer, which is your willingness to pay. Thank you very much for listening to this episode about demand. Next time, we're going to be talking about the elasticities of demand.